What's going on, guys? Andrew here with another episode of East Coast Tech. And today I have a special event for you guys today. My first PC case review. So today I will be reviewing the budget line for Cooler Master's Master Series, the Masterbox 5. The Masterbox 5 is an ATX mid-tower chassis that strikes a delicate balance between form and function. At only $60 US, this is definitely one of the cheapest mid-towers out there, and its price puts it in competition with NZXT's S340, the Fantex P400, and the Corsair Carbide Spec Alpha mid-towers. Let's see if they made any compromises to get that price point. Right out of the box, we get the case, wrapped in protective plastic, and sealed by thick hard-shell foam. Nice. And we get a tiny baggie for our accessories. More on this later. Averting our gaze to the outside of the case, we have a strikingly well done white paint job. I'm actually impressed that they were able to match the white paint on both the metal and plastic parts of the case. This is actually pretty hard to do, especially with white paint, and this attention to detail definitely deserves a shout out here. You'll also notice that the top of the case has no ventilation, just a solid top. This can be both a good thing and a bad thing depending on how you were planning on cooling. The rear side panel is plainly adorned, pretty basic, and our rear panel is simply done as well. The side panel is actually pretty rigid, and it's nice to see strong, decent quality steel used at the budget price point. The front and opposite side panels, however, are where the magic happens. Here, we are graded with a very large acrylic side panel, ever so slightly tinted, which shows off pretty much the entirety of the case's inside. And the front panel, which is a solid piece of blacked out acrylic. This particular feature is only found on the white edition of this case, as the other versions opt for a filtered mesh front panel. Even though it's not exactly see-through, LED case fans will shine through, and the effect is quite nice. The front panel, although beautifully done, is not filtered, and the only actual filter on this case is down underneath the power supply. There is, however, high enough clearance down here to allow your PSU to breathe comfortably. Now that about wraps up the exterior of the case. Let's see what's under the hood. After removing the windowed side panel, we're greeted with a very large and open layout. Right off the bat, we have a plastic power supply shroud, a 2-bay 3.5 inch or 2.5 inch hard drive enclosure. Also included in the case was one dual SSD bracket. So I'll start from the bottom and move upward. The power supply shroud is open on this end, which forms a nice barrier against the hard drive cage, and is secured with one interestingly placed thumb screw on the outside of the case. Personally, I like covering my power supplies, however, I can see how having the option would appeal to some people. Next is onto our hard drive cage. It's secured down by one thumb screw and can actually be moved into one of 3 different locations. Now for the radiator area, this case supports up to a 360mm rad in the front and one 120mm rad at the rear. 360mm rads would need an optional bracket, however you could probably get away without it depending on how you set your fans up. If you remove the HDD cage completely, you could get a wicked push-pull setup going on or use a giant radiator. Pressing onward, we have mounting positions for up to an ATX motherboard. Just a side note, you may actually be able to put an eATX board in here, but it's not officially supported. There's a large back plate cutout for aftermarket CPU coolers, and several cable routing holes. There is also support here for up to 3 of those SSD caddies. I think every screw hole on this case can have one placed in them, although one would have to actually try that out to be sure. Onto the back side of the case, those same screw holes we saw in the front can be used on the back side to place those SSD caddies as well, with an additional spot right behind the motherboard. Cooler Master claims a total of 9 SSDs can be placed in the case, but I think my math's off. Oh wait, right. the hard drive cages can house SSDs too. Okay, that makes sense. But wait! Each SSD caddy can technically fit 2 drives on it, so it's more like 14 SSDs? Or I guess you could put as many as you want as long as the side panel fits on. So there, yeah. That wraps up the facts of this case. Now let's talk about how the build process went. With such an open layout, it was an absolute breeze. I did have to take the time to screw in the motherboard standoffs, but seeing out the standoff positions are all, well labeled, it wasn't really that big of a deal. Placing the radiator was also a breeze, and although I went with a push configuration, I could have easily have gone with a push-pull, but only if I went without the hard drive cage. Speaking of the hard drive cage, the sleds are toolless for 3.5-inch hard drives and contain mounting holes for 2.5-inch SSDs, as I mentioned earlier. Or possibly a Hue Plus, which is what I'm thinking about doing. Now onto cable routing, we've got holes at the bottom for your front panel connectors. And on a side note, I do want to mention that if you're keeping the power supply shroud in place here, you should leave it on while you're connecting your front panel connectors. I actually learned the hard way that is a huge pain in the butt to try to put it back on after the fact. Just to let you know. The large holes on the side of the motherboard do not impede cabling for the 24-pin or SATA cables, but you are going to have to spend a little extra time cleaning them up on the backside. And onto the backside, speaking of that, we got plenty of cable tie loops for cable management. And we have a ridiculous amount of clearance for those cables as well, with 25mm of room at the upper sections of the case to the whopping 35mm of clearance near the PSU area. There's plenty of room for you to hide your cables, and then some. The only thing that annoyed me while cable managing this case was how crappy the included cable ties were. I probably broke over half of them in this build alone, and I had to make up for them with, with ones I already had. If you were a first-time PC builder in this case, you'd probably run out of cable ties before you were finished, and at a budget price point, which I understand, at least we can include some better quality cable ties. I mean, they probably cost a penny to 2 pennies to make, so I would have liked to have seen that here. Either way, the case is a total value option, and dwindling and poorly constructed accessories aside, still provides an above-budget experience for a great price. Even I found very few things to complain about. Wait, I forgot one. I did the math, and even with the hard drive cage installed, you really could fit a push-pull fan setup. However, the hard drive cage's furthest point for mounting makes the clearance short by like 5mm. Anyway, if you're looking for a decently constructed mid-tower with a huge side panel window and some key enthusiast features, then you will be hard-pressed to find one at a better price than the Masterbox 5. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you hated it, dislike it, get subscribed. Again, this was Andrew with East Coast Tech, and I'll see you in the next one.